sounds, of course, but compared to the marsh, the swamp is quiet because decomposition is cellular work. Life decays and reeks and returns to the rotted duff, a poignant wallow of death begetting life. On the morning of October 30th, 1969, the body of Chase Andrews lay in the swamp, which would have absorbed it silently, routinely, hiding it for good. A swamp knows about death. Definitely doesn't necessarily define it as a tragedy, certainly not as a sin. But this morning, 2 boys from the village rode their bikes out to the old firehouse, and from the 3rd switchback spotted his denim jacket. Chapter 1. Ma, 1952. The morning burned so August hot, the marsh's moist breath hung the oaks and pines with fog. The palmetto patches stood unusually quiet, except for the low, slow flap of the heron's wings lifting from the lagoon. And then Kaya, only 6 at the time, heard the screen door slap. Standing on the stool, she stopped scrubbing the grits from the pot and lowered it into the basin of the worn-out suds. No sound now but her own breathing. Who had left the shack? Not Ma. She'd never let the door slam. But when Kaya ran to the porch, she saw her mother in a low brown skirt, kick pleats nipping at her ankles as she walked down the sandy lane in high heels. The stubby-nosed shoes were fake alligator skin, her only going-out pair. Kaya wanted to holler out, but knew not to rouse Pa, so opened the door and stood on the brick-and-board steps. From there she saw the blue train case Ma carried, usually with the confidence of the cub. Kaya knew her mother would return with meat wrapped in greasy bound paper, or with a chicken head dangling down. But she never wore the gaiter heels. She never took a case. Ma looked back where the foot lane met the road, one arm held high, white palm waving as she stood onto the track which wove through bog forest, cattail lagoons, and maybe, if the tide obliged, eventually into town. But today she walked on, unsteady in the ruts. Her tall figure emerged now and then through the holes of the forest, until only swatches of white scarf flashed between the leaves. Kaya sprinted to the spot she knew would bear the road. Surely Ma would wave from there. But she only arrived just in time to glimpse the blue case, the colour so wrong for the woods as it disappeared. A heaviness, thick as black cotton mud, pushed her chest as she returned to the steps to wait. Kaya was the youngest of the 5, the others much older, though later she couldn't recall their ages. They lived with Ma and Da, squeezed together like penned rabbits in the rough-cut shack, its screened porch staring big-eyed from under the oaks. Jody, the brother closest to Kaya, but still 7 years older, stepped from the house and stood behind her. He had the same dark eyes and black hair, had taught her birdsong star names, how to steer a boat through the sawgrass. "Ma'll be back," he said. "I dunno. She was wearing the gaiter shoes. And Ma don't leave her kid. It ain't in them. You told me that foxes left her babies. Yeah, but that vixen got her leg all teared up. She starved them to death if she tried to feed herself and the kids. She was better off to leave them, heal herself up, and then whelp some more when she could raise them good. Ma ain't starving. She'll be back." Jody wasn't nearly as sure as he sounded, but said it for Kaya. Her throat tight, she whispered, "But Ma's carrying that blue case like she's going somewhere big." The shack sat back for the palmettos which scrawled across the sand flats in the necklace of the green lagoon, and in the distance all the marsh beyond. Miles so tough it grew in salt water, interrupted only by trees so bent they wore the shapes of the wind. Oak forests bunched around the other side of the shack and sheltered the closest lagoon. Its surface so rich in life it churned. Salt air and gull songs drifted through the trees of the sea. Claiming territory hadn't changed much since the 1500s. The scattered marsh holdings weren't legally described, just staked out. Natural, a creek boundary here, a dead oak there, by renegades. A man doesn't set up a palmetto lean-in to a bog unless he's on the run from somebody, or at the end of his own road. The marsh was guarded by a torn shoreline labelled by early explorers as the graveyard of the Atlantic because riptides, furious winds and shallow shoals wrecked ships like paper hats along what would be known the Carolina coast. One seaman's journal read, "Ranged along the shore, but could discern no entrance. A violent storm overtook us. We were forced to get off to sea to rescue ourselves and ships, and were driven by the rapidity of the strong current. The land being marshy and swamps, we'd return our ships. Discouragement of all such as should hereafter come into those parts to settle." Those for more serious land moved on, and this infamous marsh became a net, scooping up the mishmash of mutinous sailors, castaways, debaters, and fugitives doing war and taxes or law that they didn't take to. The ones malaria didn't kill or the swamps didn't swallow breed into the woodsmen tribes of several races and multiple cultures, each of whom could fell a small forest with a hatchet and pack a puck for miles. Like the river rats, each had his own territory, yet had to fit into the fringe or simply disappear someday into the swamp. Hundreds of years later, they were joined by runaway slaves who escaped into the marsh and were called maroons, and freed-slaved, penniless and beleaguered, who disappeared into the waterland because of scant options. Maybe it was mean country, but not an inch was lean. Layers of life's squiggly sand crabs and mud-wading crayfish, waterfowl, fish, shrimp, oysters, fatted deer and plump geese were piled onto the land or in the water. A man who didn't mind scrabbling for supper would never starve. It was now 1952, so some of the claims had been held by a string of disconnected, unrecorded persons for 4 centuries, most before the Civil War. Others squatted on the land more recently, especially after the World Wars, when men came back broken, broke up. The lash did not confine them, but defined them, and, like any sacred ground, kept their secrets deep. No one cared that they had held the land because nobody else wanted it. After all, it was wasteland bog. Just like their whiskey, the marsh dwellers bootlegged their own laws, not like those burned onto some stone tablets or inscribed on documents, but deeper ones, stamped into their genes. Ancient and natural, like those hatched from hawks and doves. When cornered, desperate, or isolated man reverts to those instincts that aim straight at survival, quick and just. They will always be the trump cards because they are passed on more frequently from one generation to the next than the gentler genes. It is not morality but simple maths. Among themselves, doves fight as often as hawks. Ma didn't come back that day. No one spoke of it, at least for Pa. Stinking of fish, drum, liquor, he clanked pot lids. "Where's supper?" Eyes downcast, and the brothers and sisters shrug. Pa dog-cussed and then limped, stepped out, back into the woods. There'd been fights before. Ma had even left a time or two, but she always came back, scooping up whoever could be cuddled. The 2 older sisters cooked a supper of red beans and cornbread, but no one sat to eat at the table. They always would have with Ma. Each dipped beans from the pot and flopped cornbread on top and wandered off to eat on She'd swing Kaya into the jitterbug, their feet banging the plywood floor until the music of the battery-operated radio died, sounding as if it was singing to itself at the bottom of the barrel. Other mornings, Ma spoke about adult things Kaya didn't understand, but she figured Ma's words needed somewhere to go, so she absorbed them through her skin as she poked more wood into the cook stove, nodding like she knew. Then the hustle of getting everybody up and fed, Pa not there. He had two settings, silence or shouting, so it was fine when he slept through, or didn't come home at all. But this morning Ma had been quiet, her eyes lost and her smile lost. She tied a white scarf pirate style low across her forehead, but the purple and yellow edges of the bruise still spilled out. Right after breakfast, even before the dishes were washed, Ma had put a few of her personal things into the train case and just walked down the road. The next morning, Kaya took up her post again on the steps, her dark eyes boring down the lane like a funnel waiting for a train. The marsh beyond was veiled in fog, so low its cushy bottom sat right on the mud. Barefoot, Kaya drummed her toes, twirled grass stems and doodlebugs, but a 6-year-old cannot sit long, and soon she moseyed onto the tidal flats, sucking sounds pulling at her toes. Swatting at the edge of the clear water, she watched minnows dart between the sunspots and shadows. Jody hollered to her from the palmettos. She stared. Maybe he was coming with news. But he wove through the spiky frods. She knew by the way he moved casual that Ma wasn't home. "You want to play explorers?" he asked. "You said that y'all said y'all too old for explorers." "Nah, I just said that. Never too old. Raise ya." They tore across the flats, then through the woods towards the beach. She squealed as he overtook her and laughed until they reached the large oak that jutted enormous arms over the sand. Jody and their older brothers, Merv, had hammered a few boards across the branches as a lookout tower and tree fort, now much of it falling down, dangling from the rusty nails. Usually if she was allowed to crew at all, it was as a slave girl bringing her brother's warm biscuits swiped from Ma's pan. But today Jody said, "You can be captain." Kaya raised her right arm in charge to run off the spin yards, she said. They broke off stick swords and crashed through the brambles, shouting and stabbing at the enemies. Then, make-believe coming and going easily, she walked onto the mossy log and sat. Silently he joined her. He wanted to say something to get her mind off Ma, but no words came, so they watched the swimming shadows of the water's striders. Kaya returned to the pool steps later and waited for a long time, but as she looked at the end of the lane, she never cried. Her face was still, her lips, a simple thin lines under searching eyes, but Ma didn't come back that day either. Chapter 2. Jody, 1952. After Ma left, over the next few weeks, Kaya's oldest brother and two sisters drifted away too, as if by example. They had endured Ma, but they had endured Pa's red-faced razors, which started as shouts and then escalated into fist slugs or backhanded punches, until one by one they disappeared. They were nearly grown anyway, and later, just as she forgot their ages, she couldn't remember their real names, only that they were called Missy, Merv, and Mandy. On her porch mattress, Kaya found a small pair of socks left by her sisters. On the morning when Jody was the only sibling left, Kaya awakened to the clatter and clank and hot grease of breakfast. She dodged into the kitchen thinking Ma was home frying corn fritters or hoe cakes, but it was Jody, standing at the wood stove staring grits. She smiled to hide the letdown and he patted the shushing her to be quiet. If they didn't wake Pa, they could eat alone. Jody didn't know how to make biscuits, and there wasn't any bacon, so he cooked grits and scrambled eggs in lard, and they sat down together silently exchanging glances and smiles. They washed their dishes fast and then ran out towards the door. Following the marsh, he led in lead, but just then Pa shouted and hobbled towards them. Impossibly lean, his frame seemed to flop about from poor gravity, his molars yellow as old dog's teeth. Kaya looked up at Jody. "We can run, hide in a mossy place." "It's okay. It will be okay," he said. Later, his son said Jody found Kaya on the beach staring at the sea. As he stepped up beside her, she didn't look at him, but he kept eyes on her rolling waves. Still, she knew by the way he spoke that Pa had slugged his face. "I have to go, Kaya. I can't live here no longer." She almost turned to him, but didn't. Wanted to beg him not to leave her alone with Pa, but the words jammed up. "When you're old enough, you'll understand, kid," he said. Kaya wanted to holler out that she may be young, but she wasn't stupid. She knew Pa was the reason they all left. What she wondered was why no one took her with them. She thought of leaving too, but had nowhere to go and no bus money. "Kaya, you be careful here. If anybody comes, don't go in the house. They can get you there. Run deep into the marsh and hide in the bushes. Always cover your tracks. I learned you how. And you're gonna hide from Pa too." When she still didn't speak, he said goodbye and strolled towards the beach to the woods. Just before he stepped into the trees, she finally turned and watched him walk away. "This little piggy stayed home," she said to the waves. Breaking her free, she ran into the shack and shouted his name down the hall, but Jody's things were already gone, his floor bed stripped bare. She sank onto his mattress, watching the last of that day slide down the light of the wall. Light lingered after the sun, as it does, some of it pooling in the wall room. So that night, for a brief moment, the lumpy beds in the pile of old clothes took on more shapes and colours than the trees did outside. A gnawing hunger, such a mundane thing, surprised her. She walked into the kitchen and stood at the door. All her life the room had been warm from baking bread, boiling butter beans, or the bubbling of fish stew. Now it was stale, quiet, dark. "Who's gonna cook?" she asked out loud. Could have asked, "Who's gonna dance?" She lit a candle and poked at the hot ash in the wood stove, added kindling. Pumped the bellows till a flame caught, and then more wood. The frigidaire served as the cupboards because no electricity came near the shack. To keep the mould at bay, the door was propped open with the fly swatter, still a greenish black veins of mildew chewing every crevice. "Getting out leftovers," she said. "I'll dump the grits in the lard and warm them up," which she did and ate from the pot, looking out the window for Pa, but he didn't come. When light from the quarter moon finally touched the shack, she crawled into her porch bed, a lumpy mattress on the floor with real sheets covered in little blue roses that Ma had got in a yard sale. Alone for the night, for the first time in her life. At first, every few minutes she sat up and peered through the screen, listening for footsteps in the wood. She knew the shapes of all the trees, still some seemed to dart here and there, moving with the moon. For a while she was so stiff she couldn't swallow, but on cue the familiar songs of tree frogs and katydids filled the night, more comforting than 3 blind mice with a carving knife. The darkness held an odorous sweetness, the earthy breath of frogs and salamanders who made it through one more stinky hot day. The marsh snuggled in closer with a low fog, and she slept. For 3 days, Pa didn't come home, and Kyle boiled turnip greens from Ma's garden for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She walked out to the chicken coop for eggs, but found it bare. but had escaped as a motley flocked clucking far into the trees beyond. She'd have scattered to grits to see if she could keep them close. On the evening of the fourth day, Pa showed up with a bottle and scrawled across his bread. Walking into the kitchen the next morning, he hollered, "Where's everybody got to?" "I don't know," she said, not even bothering to look at him. "Yeah, I don't know much of this cur dog, useless as the tits of poor hogs." Kaya slipped quietly out the porch door, but walking along the beach searching for mussels. She smelled smoke and looked up to see a plum rising from the direction of the shack. Running as fast as she could, she broke through the trees and saw a bonfire blazing in the yard. Pa was throwing Ma's paintings, dresses and books into the flames. "No!" Kaya screamed. He didn't look at her, but threw the old battery-powered radio into the fire. Her face and arms burned as she reached towards the paintings, but the heat pushed her back. She rushed into the shack to block Pa's return for more, locking eyes with him. Pa raised his backhand towards Kaya, but she stood her ground. Suddenly he turned and limp-stepped towards his boat. Kaya sank onto the bricks and boards, watching Ma's watercolours of the marsh smoulder into ash. She sat until the sun set, until all the buttons of the clothes as embered and memories of dancing the jitterbug with Ma melted into flames. Over the next few days, Kaya learned from the mistakes of the others, and perhaps more from the minnows, how to live with them. Just keep it out of the way, don't let him see you, dart from sunspots to shadows, up and out of the house before he rose. She lived in the woods and the water. She padded into the house to sleep in her bed on the porch, as close to the marsh as she could get. Pa had fought Germany in the Second World War, where his left femur caught shrapnel and shattered, their last source of pride. His weekly disability checks their only source of income. A week after Jody left, the Frigidaire stood open, and hardly any turnips remained. When Kaya walked into the kitchen that Monday morning, Pa pointed to the crumpled dollar and loose change in the kitchen. "This'll get you food for the week. There ain't no such thing as handouts," he said. "Everything costs something, and for the money you gotta keep the house up, stove wood collected, and wash the laundry." For the first time ever, Kaya walked alone towards the village of the Barclay Cove to buy groceries. This little piggy went to market. She plodded through the deep sand or black mud for 4 miles until the bays glistened ahead, the hamlet on its shore. Everglades surrounded the town, mixing their salty haze with the ocean, which swelled in the high tide on the other side of the main street. Together the marsh and the sea separated from the village from the rest of the world, the only connection being the single-lane highway that limped into town on the cracked cement and potholes. There were 2 streets. Main ran along the ocean front with a row of shops, the Piggly Wiggle grocery at one end and the Western Auto at the other. The diner in the middle. Mixed in there were Cress's 5 and Dine pennies, catalogue only, Parker's Bakery and a Buster Brown shoe shop. Next to the Piggly was the Dongon Beer Hall, which offered roasted hot dogs, red hot jellies and fried shrimp served in folded paper boats. No ladies or children stepped inside because it wasn't considered proper, but a take-out window had been cut out of the wall so they could order hot dogs and knee-high cola from the street. Coloureds couldn't use the door or the window. The other street, Broad, ran from the old highway straight towards the ocean and into the main, ending right there. So the only intersection in town was Main, Broad and the Atlantic Ocean. The stores and businesses weren't joined together as in most towns, but were separated by small vacant lots brushed with sea oats and palmettos, as if overnight the marsh had inched in. For more than 200 years, sharp, salty winds had weathered the cedar-shingled buildings to the colour of rust, and the window frames, most painted white or blue, had flaked and cracked. Mostly the village seemed tired of arguing with the elements and simply just sagged. The town walls draped in frayed ropes and old pelicans jutted into whose water, when calm, reflected the red and yellows of the shrimp boats. Dirt roads lined with small cedar houses wound through the trees, around lagoons and along the ocean on the either end of the shops. Berkeley Cove was quite literally a backwater town, bits scattered here and there among the estuaries and reeds like egret's nest flung by the wind. Barefoot and dressed in 2 short bib overalls, Kaya stood where the marsh track met the road, biting her lip, wanting to run home. She couldn't reckon what she'd say to people, how she'd figured the grocery money, but hunger was a pushing thing, so she stepped into Maine and walked head down towards Piggly Wiggle on the crumbling sidewalk that appeared now and then between grass lumps. As she approached the 5 and dime, she heard a commotion behind her and jumped to the side just as 3 boys a few years older than her sped by on bikes. The lead boy looked back at her, laughing at the near miss, and then almost collided with a woman stepping from the store. "Chase Andrews, you get back here, all 3 of you boys." They pedalled a few more yards, then thought better of it and returned to this woman, Miss Pansy Price, sales lady in fabric and notions. Her family had once owned the largest farm on the outskirts of Marsh, and although they were forced to sell out long ago, she continued her role as the genteel landowner, which wasn't easy living in the tiny apartment above the diner. Miss Pansy usually wore long hat shapes like silk turbans, and this morning her headwear was pink, setting off red lipstick and the splotches of rouge. She scolded the boys. "I've a mind to tell your mamas about this, or you better puppers, riding fast like that on the sidewalk and nearly running me over. What you got to say for yourselves, Chase?" He had the sleekest bike, red seat and chrome handlebars raised up. "We're sorry, Miss Pansy. We didn't see you 'cause the girl over there got in the way." Chase, tanned with dark hair, pointed at Kaya, who stepped back and stood half inside the myrtle shrub. "Never mind her. You can't be blaming your sins on somebody else, not even swamp trash. Now, you boys better go the deal and make up for this. There goes Miss Ariel with her groceries. Go help carry them to her truck and put your shirt tails in." "Yes, ma'am," the boys said as they biked towards Miss Ariel, who taught them all 2nd grade. Kaya knew that the parents of the dark-haired boy owned the Western store, which is why he rode the snazziest bike. She'd seen him unloading big cardboard boxes of merchandise from the truck and packing it in, but she had never spoken a word to him or the others. She waited a few minutes, then, head low again, walked into the grocery. Inside the Piggly Wiggly, Kaya stood and studied the selection of grits and chose a 1-pound bar of coarse ground yellow because the red tack hung from the top, special of the week. Like Ma taught her, she fretted into the aisles until no other customer stood at the register, then walked up and faced the checkout lady. Mrs. Singletary, who asked, "Where's your mother?" Mrs. Singletary's hair was cut short and curled tight, coloured purple as the iris in the sunlight. "Doing chores, ma'am." "Well, you got money for the grits, or don't you?" "Yes, ma'am." Not knowing how to count the exact amount, she laid down the whole dollar. Miss Singletary wondered if the children knew the difference in the coins, so she placed the change into Kai's open hand. She counted slowly. 25, 50, 60, 70, 80, 85 and 3 pennies, 'cause the grits cost 12 cents. Kaya felt sick to her stomach. Was she supposed to count something back? She stared to the puzzle of the coins in her palm. Miss Singletary seemed to soften. "Okay then, get on with ya." Kaya dashed from the store and walked as fast as she could towards the marsh track. Plenty of times Ma had told her, "Never run in town or people would think you stole something." But as soon as Kaya reached the sandy track, she ran a good half-mile, then speed-walked the rest. Back home, thinking she knew how to fix grits, she threw them into the boiling water like Ma does, but they all clumped together in one big ball that burned on the bottom and stayed raw in the middle. So rubbery she could only eat a few bites, so she searched in the garden again and found a few more turnip greens between the goldenrod, then boiled them up and ate grits and the collard green and the mash that tasted just fine. Kaya had done the laundry plenty with Ma, so she knew how to scrub the clothes on the rub board under the yard's big pot with bars of lye soap. Pa's overalls were so heavy wet she couldn't wring them out with her tiny hands and couldn't reach the line to lay them, so she draped them sopping over the palmetto frods on the end of the woods. She and Pa did this two-step, living apart in the shack, sometimes not seeing each other for days, almost never speaking. She tidied up after herself, and after him like a serious little woman. She wasn't near enough of a cook to fix meals for him. He usually wasn't there anyway, but she made his bed, picked up, swept up, and washed the dishes most of the time. Not because she'd been told, but it was because it was the only way to keep the shack decent for Ma's return. Surely Ma would come back for her birthday, so the morning after the harvest moon she put on the calico dress and stared down the lane. Kaya willed Ma to be walking towards the shack, still in her alligator shoes and long skirt. When no one came, she got the pot of grits and walked down the woods towards the seashore. Hands to her mouth, she held her head back and called kee-cow, kee-cow, kee-cow. Specks of silver appeared in the sky from up and down the beach, from over the surf. Here they come. I can't count as high as that many gulls are, she said. Crying and shrieking, the birds swirled and dived, hovered near her face and landed as she tossed grits to them. Finally, they quieted and stood near the preening, and she sat on the sand, her legs folded to the side. One large gull settled onto the sand next to Kaya. It's my birthday today, she told the bird. If you liked that, I will be continuing to read this book to help you fall asleep at night. So if you want to follow on, I will be posting two, not one, but two chapters